there was something else out there that I was better at. I wasn't fulfilling my potential. I knew it. And I felt like my parents had given everything to try and give opportunities for myself and my brother and sister to have easier and better lives they had growing up. And I just wasn't really honoring that. And so, I did a couple of self-help courses and I just got really clear on the fact that I just needed to go out and make a change and find what it was that I'm meant to do or that I'm going to be more successful at. And I got really clear on my desire and ability to help people get excited about stuff. I've always been quite an excitable guy, and I therefore thought, actually, do you know what? Being a teacher will give me access to helping kids.
From Coordinate Sports, it's The Drive Phase, a show about sports founders, leaders, and experts, and the stories behind their business journeys. Our guest on this episode is Richard Raynes, CEO and co-founder of Sport Inspired. Sport Inspired exists so that every child, regardless of background, can develop the confidence and courage to follow their dreams. The charity works to bring local sporting opportunities to children experiencing economic barriers to entry. We discuss with Richard his drive to launch the charity and their latest campaign, The Year of Play. Enjoy the show. Okay, so excited to welcome Richard Raynes, the CEO and co-founder of Sport Inspired, the charity working with children across the UK to improve their well-being in some of the most deprived areas as well. Currently working with over 10,000 children a year, and really looking forward to hearing more about the setup and the mission of the charity with Richard today. So welcome to the Drive Phase podcast, Richard.
Hi, thanks for having me.
No problem at all. As we always do, I try to get to know our guests. So in terms of your early life, one question we've been asking recently is, what was your earliest sporting memory?
My earliest sporting memory, that's a great question. Probably playing football at my primary school.
Yeah.
I started off with the pleasure of being a football captain, and then steadily my talent went downhill from there.
Yeah, so you mentioned primary school there. So what was that? What was your experience at school like? Did you enjoy it? I mean, I guess primary school, most of us enjoy that time. Secondary school changes, but that was was that in Devon, was it?
Yeah, I grew up in rural Devon. I went to a school that had 40 kids in the entire school. Wow. And so when you talk about having a football team, you're talking about most of the school is in that team at once. And I love primary school. And then as I got older, I found school increasingly tougher.
From that sporting angle, was your family sporty, or was it kind of...
No, not really.
Yeah.
My family wasn't sporty, but my mum was a passionate believer in getting to try lots of different sports. And she always used to say to me, just give it a go. If you don't like it, I'll never ask you to do it again, but try it. And so that had me try pretty much every sport going. And that was a massively important aspect of my life and ending up in terms of what I've become, but also as a kid in how I navigated my way through some tough experiences.
Yeah, so I guess that mindset from your mum there, having an open mindset is going to stand you in good stead outside of sport in general. So yeah, as you moved into secondary school then, is that, you said, a slightly different experience. Are you able to elaborate a little bit on that for us?
Sure. I had a difficult few years at secondary school from when I was about 14 to 16. I got bullied and I found that I became literally afraid to speak in case what I said got ripped to shreds. But I was also very fortunate that I had recently started whitewater kayaking. I had one of those inspirational teachers who ran a canoe club at my school. And in Devon, there is whitewater. There's lots of hills around. And as fast as I was losing confidence from the bullying situation, I was getting it back from the incredible whitewater that I was doing. And as a consequence, by the time I left school, I was afraid to speak, believe it or not. But I was genuinely ready to go and see what I could do and achieve. I had self-belief, and that came from sport. And if I hadn't keep trying lots of different sports, I never would have ended up, into whitewater kayaking.
Do you think, did that play any part in things moving from, like you said, rural primary school, small setting, like not many pupils, into secondary. I don't know how big the secondary school was, but generally that seems like it would be like a really big step from that kind of, I guess, family environment at that primary school to the big secondary.
Yeah, it was 700, 800 kids, so it was a lot bigger school. It was just a very different culture, and yeah, it's one I struggled with, and I'll always be grateful for that experience. Without wishing to sound too cliched, I wouldn't change it because character building and all that stuff, that's true. It wasn't much fun at the time, but and then the canoeing aspect of it has obviously made a colossal difference to my life. It's still my favorite sport and something I really love doing.
Yeah, and I guess it's like a huge confidence builder, right? Because not many people can throw themselves down down a white water. I guess at that age as well. So you had I guess those feelings when you're in school, because outside that was your outlet, was it? The sport outside of school.
Absolutely.
Did you take that further? Did you take that into kind of college, university? You
Yeah.
continue that all the way through, yeah.
Yeah, I ended up running my canoe club at university, and obviously that made a big difference to my life and my belief in my ability to organize and run and help get other people excited about doing these sort of things. And that then literally fed into the early version of Sport Inspired that we run today. We ran a multi-sport tournament at university that came off the back of my experience of canoe club, and it went from there.
What did you study in university? Was it along sports? Because I know obviously initial career wasn't in sport, was it?
No, French and business.
Right. Okay. So that's going to help you with the expansion of sport inspired into the EU then, hopefully.
Well, that's it. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, coming out of uni, your initial career, that was corporate career, right? Was it
Yeah,
recruitment?
I started off as a headhunter. I've always done quite a lot of sales stuff. As a kid, I used to sell Christmas trees on my dad's market stall, and I did that for 5 years. And then eventually I got to my late 20s, decided it was time for a major career change, what I refer to as my early life crisis. And I retrained to be a teacher. And then it was the same time when I started Sport Inspired with my co-founder, Pete Thomond.
Yeah, I guess that must have been was that a difficult decision at the time? So I'm looking at recruitment, and it's obviously well-paid career, obviously high pressure, etc. But taking that step away to become a teacher, was it? How did that come about? You kind of, was it burnout? What was the
I I got to the stage where I was doing okay, but not particularly great. And there was a growing sense that I had there was something else out there that I was better at. I wasn't fulfilling my potential. I knew it. And I felt like my parents had given everything to try and give opportunities for myself and my brother and sister to have easier and better lives they had growing up. And I just wasn't really honoring that. And so, I did a couple of self-help courses and I just got really clear on the fact that I just needed to go out and make a change and find what it was that I'm meant to do or that I'm going to be more successful at. And I got really clear on my desire and ability to help people get excited about stuff. I've always been quite an excitable guy, and I therefore thought, actually, do you know what? Being a teacher will give me access to helping kids to get more excited about their lives. And then at the same time, that the sport inspired thing about connecting kids with sports, helping them to find a sport they enjoy and finding a way to help use that as a way to have the best lives that they can have.
Yeah, so that journey into teaching, obviously, was it secondary school teaching you went into, or primary?
That's right. Yeah, secondary.
Secondary, yeah. So how was that? I mean, it's slightly different. You had to retrain and start again.
Well, everyone told me I'd make a really good teacher, and I stupidly believed them. Turns out that teaching is really hard,
Yeah,
and
tell me about it.
I
I
was
think we
really
all know that as well
surprised.
with the homeschooling and everything going on at the moment. I think everyone's
A lot of
realising
people are
that now.
finding that right at the
Yeah,
moment. Yeah, I thought my passion for helping kids and my passion for French. I retrained as a French teacher, and I thought that would be enough for it to be pretty straightforward. But it turns out it's really hard. So I love teaching. It was 2 years of exceptionally hard work, but when you get kids that do listen, that do react over time, you can see that they start to trust you and they start to believe they can learn and get the skills that you're trying to help them with. That's incredibly rewarding.
Genesis, I guess, for Sport Inspired, you touched on kind of the idea. initially, but when you launched Sport Inspired, this is like 2008, is that right?
Yeah,
When you
so
came
as
together.
as a social enterprise in 2008.
Right. So prior to that, and you mentioned your co-founder there. Can you tell us a story about? Because we're always interested in that origin story and like how things all get started, and whether it was how you even started thinking about the idea. But yeah, if you could give us that, it would be interesting.
So the background to myself and my co-founder.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Pete Thomond and I met on my first day at university. We were putting halls together. We immediately hit it off. We realised that we shared a huge love for all things fun, however you define that. So I think you can probably imagine some of the stuff we got up to as university students do. But what also united us was how grassroots sports had made a massive difference to our individual lives. You know, my background. For Pete, he grew up in a single parent family in Canvey Island in Essex. He was head of his family from when he was 12 years old, and he describes his karate club as his island of sanity. And his karate teacher was effectively the critical male role model in his life that was missing from his family situation, and helped him to believe in himself, to measure his own success by his own standards, not by other people's. And so whilst a lot of kids around him were making choices that led down other paths, were not so good, he was able to keep on the straight and narrow and go to university and do really well. So we met, we hit it off, and eventually, we ended up starting Sport Inspired
So
together.
something you were kind of talking about over the years, a bit like develop that friendship at uni and been speaking about, and then you made the decision to get into it.
Yeah, so that multi-sport festival I talked about that we ran at uni. So Pete and I ran that together, and then post uni, I fell into running a kids rugby club in Hackney, and I discovered during that time that there was a lot of kids that I would meet that say if you don't like football, there's no sport for you out there.
Yeah.
And that's crazy because in places like London, every sport you've ever heard of is there somewhere, but something wasn't working in helping introduce kids to sports properly, or if they were being introduced, not in a way those sports landed for them. And at the same time, I was really, really inspired by seeing that some of the toughest kids in Hackney in London coming along to the rugby club, learning respect and discipline and self-belief. In front of my eyes, I could see that stuff happening. And so for me, it's a case of we've got to find a better way to introduce these kids to sports, lots of sports that are available to them locally, help every kid find a sport they enjoy, and then the world will be saved was like the naive soundbite in my head. And so Pete helped me with that first festival, and then after that, the following year, we started working with UBS, our first partner, and became a social enterprise, and went from there.
Brilliant. So in those early days, that's one of the questions I was going to ask in terms of funding. So you've got that mission, bring the sport and kind of signpost children to it. And I know you'll explain exactly how you do that. But what was the funding situation like to start out with? Obviously, were you filling grant applications in left, right, and centre, or was it more of a corporate sponsorship model?
So we went down the corporate sponsorship model. So initially, that first, I think it was a £1,000 check we got from UBS to help with providing sports providers. And then the following year, the check got a little bigger. Then we were invited to do a couple of talks. And then we had a few more corporates that said, oh, we'd really like your help. And then it got to the point where after a couple of years, we had about £20,000 built up from these different corporate partnerships that meant that I could take the plunge from being a teacher to going full time, and it went from there.
Great. So at the time, you're teaching are you teaching in Hackney at the time as well, or is it just that's
I was teaching in Croydon, actually.
Right, so working in Croydon, and I guess one of my questions is in terms of the issue that you're solving and the mission of the organisation. What do you think is causing that in terms of that's the limited access to these sports? What would you think would be the underlying factor that's the main problem?
So that's a question with about 20 answers, right? And you don't want 20. So
We've got time now, we can get into it.
So let me unpick a couple of things here. The first thing is there's a range of barriers to kids doing sports. Some are real and some are, I say imagine, but they're mental barriers rather than physical ones.
Right, like a perceived,
So,
peer pressure. Whatever, yeah.
yeah, exactly. And concerns of kids about, if I go along to that club, how are people going to treat me? How are people going to react to me? All these things are going on. I think if we look at the real barriers, first of all, then for kids in areas of high deprivation, clearly money is in short supply, or they don't have it at all. So if it costs to pay to go along to that club to buy equipment, that's an obvious barrier.
Some
In terms
sports, like
of
you said, some sports are really prohibitive in terms of cost as well, aren't they? So
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and so I do one of the more expensive ones, right? Why would kayaking is a really expensive sport? But if you go along to a club, and Hackney is quite a good example. There is a canoe club in Hackney. It's called the Laburnum Canoe Club, and it uses the canal that's in Hackney. And so if kids go along to that, it's the cost for doing that is very low. So that it is possible, but most kids wouldn't know that unless they're introduced to that club and to that sport. So then once you move from the real barriers like cost and I guess access in terms of how far away is it to do that sport? Do you have to take transport? Do you need your parents to take you there? And again, in deprived communities, that logistical support in terms of transport and in terms of family is often, again, much harder to come by. Parents working long hours, and sometimes, that the support isn't there. Imagine, or the mental hurdles to then joining that club are a case of, firstly, kids convinced they won't enjoy something. So unless you can get them to try it, they may be unwilling to imagine that they could enjoy it. And then secondly, even if they do, the fear of going somewhere and, as I said before, being judged and not having friends, and that stops a lot of people in turning up in the first place.
I guess role models is a big one as well. If they don't see people like them in those sports, it's difficult for them to kind of relate to it and want to get involved.
Yeah.
So in terms of the model, because I'm interested to know exactly how it works. So in terms of, you're bringing the sports, you're highlighting them to young people, children, young people. How does that work essentially? I know what it was like when you first started, but now I'm assuming it's a lot larger scale. So yeah, how does it
evolve?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So our model works in 4 phases, really. First of all, we recruit the community. So we reach out to local sports providers and local schools and invite them to take part in the program. We're always targeting year 4s, so 9-year-olds, as a critical age where kids are making really important decisions at a very fast rate about what they do and don't like in life.
I was going to say, is that based on like that? Is that the key age then, 8, 9 years old?
Yeah, it's a very important, anywhere in that kind of 7 to 10 age is where kids are making huge decisions about their lives. Once you get post 10, 11 years old into secondary age, most kids have made choices and it's quite hard to change their opinion.
I get you saying, definitely.
So we target year 4s as a highly influential age for kids, so 9-year-olds. And so we'll invite schools to bring down their entire year group to the second part of our model, which is the festival. Right. And that's introducing those kids to 6 locally available sports, some team sports, some individual sports. We're obviously trying to give them a taste of a variety so that hopefully we can find a sport that every single one of those kids does enjoy. And the goal at that festival is make it so fun and so exciting that even kids that absolutely hate sport have fun. And our secret weapon is we use what we call the Team Spirit trophy as the biggest trophy. And we're telling those kids that find sport easy, you won't win the biggest trophy if you do what you're used to doing, which is, dominating. And what you've got to do is help the kids don't find it so easy to get into the game. And then the kids that will do anything to avoid sport normally, we say to them, you can't do that here if you want the biggest trophy. If you want Team Spirit points, give it a go. Try for your team. Just take part. All we want is you to try your best. And if you try your best, we promise you that will always be good enough in our festivals, in our programs. And that's the message we want to get across to kids. Their best is good enough. And if we can help them to have fun and get that message that their best is good enough to land, then we've got a real shot getting them to see being active as something that they could have as a part of their life, that they want to have as part of their life.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. I mean, some of the one of the big things with kids is that first experience, right? So it's that first experience that they have with you at the festival, or if it's the first time they've tried a specific sport. If it's a good one, then they're more likely to continue. It's like you hear all the stories from cycling proficiency or swimming lessons when we were kids that just switch people off from swimming or cycling totally from an early age. I'm just interested in terms of how you deliver that. So is that you partner with the local providers and they come in and are they there on that festival?
That's right.
Working on that. Right.
Yes. So we recruit a range of sports at a typical festival. You might have a local karate instructor. You might have a local rugby guy or lady. You might have badminton. You might have fencing, parkour. There's very few sports we haven't done actually at some point or other. So we're, a mix of traditional sports and some of the newer sports that really grab kids' attention. And then the kids are all in teams. They're competing against each other at all these different sports, including the individual sports. They've got 20 minutes. The instructors are just going at it, getting everyone to have fun. And remember, we've got entire year groups being brought down, not just the sporty kids. And that's how we can get the less and least sporty kids to get involved and try it and give them that positive experience that plants the seed that maybe they can enjoy being active. And then once we planted that seed, then after the festival, our job is to turn that into something that lands and embeds as a grounded idea inside them that being active is a positive part of their lives.
Just from my experience, past experience, having that friendly face from the club there. So if you're looking at, again, we'll get into kind of what happens after the festival, but I'm assuming you've got all the connections and they're all there. So like my first experience is I've seen the guy from karate, the guy who runs a karate club. When I go down there, I recognise his face and I'm kind of welcomed in, and that stigma of turning up is reduced.
Yeah,
is that the next step? Is it kind of just referrals after that to say these?
So it was in the early days.
Right.
In the early days, it was about, look, if we can introduce these kids to the karate instructor and give them a really positive experience of karate at that festival, then we can signpost them. They'll join the club, and our job's done. And what we realised is sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. And far too many kids, again, that we needed to build a bridge really between the festival and that community club. And so for us, it was, again, bring the sport to the kids. And so our standard model now is to set up after school clubs at the school using that local instructor. So just like you said, that familiarity, having met that instructor at the festival, have fun with them, realize that you like them, that you enjoyed the experience of doing that sport with them, that's the same person you're going to see again when you go along to the club. But again, having that club at that school is removing another very important barrier. Firstly, kids are comfortable within the setting of their school. So the fear of going somewhere new and, what's that going to be like and how are people going to judge you is removed. And then secondly, the logistical barrier. We don't need to rely on parents or siblings taking their kids to another location. The club's there at their school, after school, makes it much easier to get kids to act on their enjoyment of that sport at the festival, turn up to that club, and hopefully it becomes a habit. So we run these clubs for 20 weeks, and that's based on behavior change principles that if you do something for 20 weeks, you're much more likely to stick at it going forwards. And then after that, we encourage the schools to keep running that club using their own sports funding if it's successful. And we encourage the kids to join the local sports club as well.
So in terms of where you are at the moment, I'm talking about Hackney and London. What's your kind of geographical reach now? I know it's probably evolved since then. So what does it look like at the moment?
So we do about 2/3, 3/4 of our programs across London. And we work in most of the boroughs of London with high deprivation. And then we do about a third to a quarter of the rest of our programs elsewhere across the UK, in mainly major towns and cities at the moment.
And you've got the okay. So looking forward, what does the organisation look like in the next 5 to 10 years? What's your plans for Sport Inspired?
We're about to launch our 2030 plan, which is how can we scale from working with 10,000 kids a year at the moment to 150,000 kids a year by 2030. And the reason for that number is there's 4.1 million kids living in deprivation across the UK. And if we work with all 9-year-olds in deprivation every year, that'll be about 150,000 kids a year. So we can help all kids to find a sport that they enjoy once we scale up to that level.
In terms of how that looks, is that just replicating and scaling the model that you've got, regional offices? What's the kind of grand master plan?
Really great question. I think the first critical point about Sport Inspired is we're a charity that's a little bit of a cliche. Ultimate goal is obviously to do ourselves out of a job. We're not there to empire build. Our model is fundamentally about helping to connect and build infrastructure for and within local communities. So we're not out there sending our own sports coaches to go and help kids. We're there trying to empower brilliant local sports coaches to work with brilliant local teachers, build those relationships and allow the impact of what they do to flourish, for them to help and work with more kids. And so our goal is really to run as many programs as we can so that we can reach more and more kids, to help set up those structures, so those relationships between local sports providers and schools. And then secondly, to train probably mainly secondary schools in how to run our programs. So part of the model is working with teenagers as young leaders. We train the usually year 8s and year 9s to lead the primary school kids. We're currently working on our playbook, which is the step-by-step process on how to organise and run one of our programs. And we then train up those kids and schools to run the programs. And they're the guardians of that infrastructure building and nourishing going forwards.
In terms of, I guess one of the key things for yourself is obviously evidencing the impact you're having, and with that wider vision of impacting 150,000, or you're going to see that as they're growing up, right? You're going to see how they've been inspired by the program. How do you go about doing that? Do you have a key metric that you follow, or a way you collect data?
Yeah, I think that the single most important metric that we follow is the number of inactive kids that we're able to convert into being active. So we measure kids before taking part in our programs, after the festival, after 3 months, 6 months and 12 months, and going forwards, obviously longer term as well. And we currently expect around about 40% of the inactive kids to become active. I know that 40%, may not sound like a big number, but you're talking about kids that are absolutely convinced they can never and will never enjoy being active. So it's something that I'm really proud of.
And just more on, I guess, running the organisation for yourself, what's kind of the recurring challenges that you have day to day in operations, really?
Well, operationally, it's the nuts and bolts of working with the schools and sports providers. Schools are obviously very busy in just doing what they're doing with the kids already. And so convincing them to work with us and helping trying to work within an incredibly busy schedule already for them is logistically the hardest
thing. For your program in that.
Yeah. I mean, the demands on teachers, everyone knows demands on teachers are very high. And at the moment, the main requirement of schools is to help kids get qualifications. And it is starting to shift, but only once that we place as much store on schools helping kids to be successful people and not just successful at gaining qualifications, will we really get the bandwidth, if you like, to embrace this type of thing to its full potential. And so that's on a day-to-day basis. Yeah, the hardest thing is just trying to work within busy schedules.
Yeah, definitely. I think just thinking about it now, coming out of where we are now with the lockdown, etc., there's this big demand. Even more so, there's a massive opportunity for yourself. So you've got loads of kids who are just desperate to do anything, I guess, just get out of the house and want to move around, or the parents are as well. So hopefully there'll be a lot bigger take-up and interest. I'm interested in your philosophies, I guess, around how you've grown the organisation, and if you've managed to develop any like business approaches or philosophies that you utilise. Have you got anything around that? And obviously, as a charity, obviously you've got to be like frugal with your finances coming in. Is there any way that you kind of approach the project?
I think there's all sorts of things that have been really important to us, but a couple of the key ones as we've been developing, we really passionately believe in what we're doing, obviously, and the need for it, the importance of it. But it's always been really clear to us that the value of what we do and being able to demonstrate and prove and reprove the value of what we do is absolutely critical. And that goes always round, including to our funding partners. So, for instance, we built a lot of our early funding from corporate partners, and the volunteering side of what we did was very important for that. And so we understood that whilst our primary goal was to connect kids with sports and get them excited about doing those sports, we had to have a high quality experience for everyone, not just the kids, but the volunteers that get involved, and have them want to do it again and again and again. So that focus on who our stakeholders were and are, and making sure that everyone gets value every time, has been central to our philosophy. Living within our means as well, managing our finances very carefully, and making sure that, you know, we never get carried away by spending because we think that it's important and the opportunity is there. You've always got to be able to pay the bills.
Yeah, it's sustainable. Yeah, definitely. For yourself, obviously, I know we talked about the kayaking. Do you have anything else that you do day to day, routines, keep yourself performing at a high level?
Wow. Now I've reached the tender middle years of my life, I guess I'd describe it as. I focus a lot more on sleep now than I used to. I think there's a lot more understanding out there about the importance of sleep. I don't take things for granted quite so much. So I work a lot harder on my fitness. And then on a general well-being level, then I try very hard to make sure that no matter how difficult I'm finding it, there's always other people out there that are finding it harder, and therefore to have that awareness and try and stay connected and see who needs help, and make sure you're not getting too insular, it being all about you and what you're doing. And so keeping the mental and physical well-being things in balance is very important.
Yeah, taking that step back, sure. And just in terms of any organisation, if they want to get involved with what's going on, and obviously going to see your mission for 2030 and listen to this and think they want to be able to support, what's the best way for them to get involved?
So our 2030 mission is being kicked off with, in fact, today, with our campaign, A Year of Play. And that's to get 10,000 kids post-lockdown into sport or back into sport and reuniting with their friends. Like, we've had a lot of strong feedback that one of the things that kids are really struggling with is confidence around playing sport. They've lost confidence. And so we want to set up 200 clubs across the country and help 10,000 kids to reunite with their friends. And so through our website, you can see our Year of Play campaign. We're looking for supporters and funders that can help make that happen.
Fantastic. Well, we'll link all that in the show notes and the description on the website. Last question for you, for myself. If you're going to go back to when you first started the organisation, what piece of advice would you give yourself?
Never give up.
Yeah, resilience, right?
It's literally a family rule in my family. I think it's the most important advice that anyone can give or receive.
No, I totally agree. I think it's entrepreneurship is whoever's last man standing is normally the winner, right? So yeah, totally agree. Richard, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it. And hopefully, and wish you well with the new vision. And hopefully we'll see you next time we speak. You'll be at 150,000 kids a year.
I really appreciate it, James.
Thank you for listening to this week's show. You can subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can write to us at dryphase.podcast@coordinate.cloud, tweet us at coordinatesport, or follow us on Instagram at coordinate_sports, or on my account at James_ventures. This episode was produced by Nancy Kwamboka, with support from Claire Goodchild and Lola Small, with special thanks to Rochelle. I'm James Moore, and you've been listening to The Drive Phase from Coordinate Sport.